Hello everyone and welcome to today's live Q&A session we have today Anthony Eftekhari. But before we get started with this live Q&A, I have a few announcements to make. For those of you who are looking to register now for the fall term, please get in and sign up now for all the classes that you want to take. Basically, we have a little less than 2 weeks left for registration right now. So if you can, I would just say go check out the website and sign up for any classes that you want to take. Again, registration is only open for the next 2 weeks. After that, we're going to basically cut it off and start the term. And also next week, we'll be hosting another live Q&A session featuring Sam Nicklap. So for those of you looking to see what his class will be about, please sign up for that Q&A. We'll be sending out the links for that, I think, sometime either today or tomorrow. But look for that information for next week's Q&A as well. But again, back to today's session, we again have Anthony Eftekhari, and he'll be basically going over a little bit about his class and what he'll be covering during the term. And remember, if you have any questions, look for your question module that you have when you sign into the room. You can enter all your questions in that way. And basically we'll be able to ask the questions to Anthony as they come up. But without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Anthony now to basically give us an introduction as far as who he is and how he got into the industry, etc. So Anthony, I'm passing it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much for having me here today, and thank you guys for coming in, spending your time with me on Saturday. My name is Anthony Eftekhari. I'm a senior matte artist at Blizzard Entertainment, working on their cinematics. A little background about myself. I started, drawing from comic books like we all love to do when we were kids. Should I share my screen now, Ted, or?
Yes.
Okay. Sure, there we go. Do you want me to put on a little slideshow as well?
Yeah, that can happen. Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Okay. So you guys are on board. Here's some of some studies and color work, so we'll do a little slideshow. So yeah, I grew up watching the classic Disney movies that had amazing animation and color, and I was really in love with animation when I saw the movie. And one movie that kind of changed my life really was, for a lot of the older generation it was Star Wars, but for me it was a movie called Jurassic Park. When I saw that movie when I was a kid, it changed everything. I knew I wanted to be a movie somehow, some way. So I grew up in Toronto, Canada, and there was a school nearby that all my art teachers in high school would tell me about. It was Sheridan College, and they had a traditional animation program that was well known all over the world for having the best art and animation program anywhere. So naturally, that's where I wanted to go. And when I got there, walking around in the hallways, it was really intimidating, seeing the amazing artwork on the walls. It felt like such a huge mountain to climb, and I think I'm still trying to climb it today. But the program was awesome, really focused on foundation drawing and painting, and it was all traditional then. But somewhere in my second year, I realized that I enjoyed doing the background paintings and lighting designs rather than animating. And that was traditional animation, so it was 24 drawings per second of animation, so it was really grueling. So I don't know if that could have been a cause for my not liking it so much, but anyways, I enjoyed the background paintings, and that was around the time when they put out the DRT map painting book that came out with Dylan Cole and Chris Stosky, and that was when I knew what I wanted to do for a living. The images were just so awesome, and it mixed fantasy and color and lighting. It just blew my mind that you can do this for a living and make money. So I worked like crazy, getting my digital skills, digital painting skills up, and I put together a portfolio. And in my third year in school, I applied for an internship at a VFX studio in Toronto that was working on films, television, and commercials, and I got the job, or the internship, for the summer. And while I was there, I learned so much about production. It was insane. Like, I remember one of my teachers, when I came back in my fourth year, telling me that 3 months of production work is equivalent to 3 years of school, and he was right. I had learned so much about all aspects of production. Because it was a small studio, I had to do a lot of compositing, modeling, texturing, lighting, and matte painting, and a lot of that was learning it on the job, or going home and spending the extra hours and learning it. And that was great because it exposed me to all aspects of production. It just made me more of a generalist to know every aspect of it. So when I finished school, they asked me to come back, and I worked there full-time for about 2 years. After that, I moved on to another studio in Toronto called Intelligent Creatures to take on more challenging projects. They had just done some great work on Zack Snyder's The Watchmen movie, so I really wanted to go there and work on some of the projects they had. I met some awesome artists there. I learned a lot again, and every time you go to a new studio, you learn a lot. And that's another thing that I think is important to mention, is that when you learn so much from your peers when you're in school or working professionally. I can't tell you how much I learned from other people, their experiences, their views on how they approach different shots or paintings. And I would really highly recommend, being social when you're in school and working, to meet new people and learn from each other. And you make, lifelong friends along the way. But it's important to have those relationships and learn from each other. I think that's one of the biggest things that made me kind of the artist that I am today. So after I worked there for about 8 months, and I really wanted to go, to California where all the big projects were. So I had been in touch, kind of emailing back and forth with Chris Stosky, who was an awesome matte painter, and he was at Image Movers Digital at the time in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I had shown him my stuff, and he liked it, and he said, "Why don't you apply? We're hiring." So I got an interview there, and they had called me up, and they said, Doug Chang really likes your work and wants to interview. And I was kind of blown away. I was like, the awesome Doug Chang wants to interview me, and I almost blurted out, "Are you sure it's me?" I couldn't believe it. I mean, he was an idol of mine in the art world, and I was just so thrilled that it was one of those moments where, like, "Are you sure? You're not making a mistake?" But I was thrilled. So, but that was the good side of this. Downside of that story was, just when I was about to fly out there to start, they had called me and told me that Disney had decided to close the studio down, and 450 people were, potentially out of work. And, that's devastating to hear, not only for the people that work there, but, on a selfish level, your dream is almost crushed right away. But, that was probably the worst news. But, I kept on. I went to Prime Focus in Vancouver for a little bit. They were working on Tron and Sucker Punch at the time. And while I was there, I got a call again from Image Movers saying that they can't hire me full-time because of the closure, but if I was interested in a contract position for about 6 months to finish up the project, it was available. So of course I jumped on it right away. Again, the thought of working with those amazing artists and that I always saw in the art books was just too enticing. So I left Prime Focus. I went over to Image Movers Digital. I was there for about 6 months to finish Mars Needs Moms. It was a great experience because I met so many amazing artists again and learned from them. And the whole studio has such a good vibe. It was a shame that they closed it down. But after that, I applied to Blizzard Entertainment, which was in Southern California. I had just seen their Lich King cinematic, and that was what sold me on the place. I mean, it was just so amazing that it combined, the fantasy element with a little bit of a hyper-real, photoreal look, and I was just sold. I said, I got to work on this stuff. So I got hired on, and they were working on the Diablo cinematic when I came there, and I went on to. I'm still there. I've been there for almost 3 years now, and since then I worked on the World of Warcraft, the Mists of Pandaria cinematic, StarCraft 2 Heart of the Swarm cinematic, the Diablo expansion just came out, the Reaper of Souls. And yeah, it's been an awesome experience so far. So that is my background.
That's awesome, actually. And have you been enjoying it all the time, or have there been times where you had situations where you just didn't know why you had gotten into this particular thing?
Yeah, there's definitely times like that, but I see it as a labor of love. If you really love what you do and you have a passion for it, for me it was always like, I can't believe they're paying me to do this stuff. It was, a paycheck was a bonus. So, I think if you have that passion, and times will get tough. You'll be. I've crunched. I've done all-nighters during production, and it's been tough sometimes. But it's that passion that will keep you going. You learn from every single experience that you're in, and as long as you have that passion and drive, and you love what you do, it's not going to be that hard. It just makes it so much easier.
Right. That's awesome. So before we let you go any further, again, for those of you in attendance, please start entering in your questions now to the question module if you have any. We'll basically be asking the questions in the order they're received. But for right now, we'll let Anthony talk a little bit more about what he will be talking about in his actual class with us here at CGMA. So,
yeah, so the class pretty much will cover, I see a lot of new map painters. What they're doing these days is really using photos and just bashing it together. I think they lack the real understanding of the lighting, the value structure, the color that goes along, that makes your map paintings look real and believable. And one of the things I focus on is really when you're looking at photo reference is having the ability to break it down to its essential elements. And finding out, what makes this photo look real? What are the essential things? If I broke it down to its most basic forms, how will it read, and make it look believable? Because, painting in all the details and the textures, and that's all just icing on the cake. The thing that will really make your map paintings look real is those essential elements, the lighting cues, the value cues, atmosphere, and then you get into mood and color. So we focus on how to pull those elements out from photos and really analyze photos for what they can give us, and how we can use those and apply it to our paintings to make it look realistic. So we take a look at value structure, the essential elements of photos, and how we take those photos and relight them. How do we manipulate those photos to make it work for our sketch or a painting? A lot of the times I see people using photos and become a slave to the photo. They find this amazing photo and they just build on top of that photo a little bit because they don't want to mess around with it too much. I think that's a huge crutch. Whereas you should be sketching out your own concept and your own lighting design, and then having photo reference help you take it to the next level. So finding elements and extracting out clean alphas and elements from photos and applying it to your own concept sketch, I think is very important. So that's another thing we go through, how we can use photos, extract clean alphas to put in our paintings, talk about atmosphere, value, and mood, and then we go into how a cityscape map painting is brought together, because that's a whole different animal. It's a lot about perspective. It's about atmosphere. It's about texture, structure, and lighting, and how to make those forms read. So how kind of production techniques that I use. You could see this in the StarCraft cinematic. There was a lot of futuristic cityscapes in there. So how do we get that quality of work or quality of artwork into our own concept painting? So we cover cityscape map painting, then we go into landscape map painting as well. Something like this, what you're looking at right now in World of Warcraft, has a lot of landscape map painting, and not only just taking photos, but stylizing it to fit into what I had to do was the World of Warcraft style. So how do we manipulate photos and create a stylized map painting that can fit into a specific style? If you're doing animation map painting, that show has a specific style. So how do we use the tools in Photoshop to make our photos work for us, stylizing them with color, lighting, and just photo manipulation? And then we go into working from a plate. A lot of the times, whether you're working in animation, cinematic work, or film, you have to work from a plate sometimes, extending out the matte painting. So how do we match the lighting, the color, the atmosphere that might be in the plate, the style that's in the plate? So we cover that, and again, how we can take from a concept sketch of our extension straight onto a full photo or hyper-real matte painting. We also cover things like different lighting conditions, sunset to maybe an overcast, making it gloomy, kind of like what you're seeing right now on the screen. How do we drive a mood through to our artwork? It takes a combination of not just one photo, but combining several different photos together, like something like this, where you see a skyscape like that. It's not just one perfect photo. How do we use several different photos, color correction techniques, putting it together and creating a mood that will really drive home the style and the mood that the director or art director is going for? So yeah, that's generally the gist of it. We cover a lot of those techniques that I mentioned, and at the end we do a portfolio piece. So we take you do a sketch of different ideas, and then you have lighting designs in them, and we take that into a more of a finished piece, and then full on to a full-blown matte painting to get a nice portfolio piece at the end of it.
Awesome. So we have a few questions that basically popped up during your talk there, and I'll basically start with the first one here, which in a way you kind of hinted on, but before I ask a question, this individual basically, I believe, was a fellow Sheridan alumni, and their question is, how do you improve your digital painting skills? And I'm assuming over time. Like, how do you?
Absolutely, yeah. So what I'm actually showing you guys on the screen right now is one of those ways, and this is something I try to do as much as I can, and I would highly recommend everyone, to get not only the digital painting skills, but just what I was talking about, the essential lighting elements from a photo. So, I take just a photo that I like with some different lighting, and I'll try to obviously make it different every single time, and I'll just do a quick half-an-hour study of it on if I were to break this down to its essential elements, how do I make this thing look realistic? And don't worry about, the brush techniques. I see a lot of people online in the art forums. I think they're more concerned about how textured their brush is, and the cool effect they can get from it than the actual lighting and, the value structure and design of what they're trying to paint. And I think that's really a crutch, as a new artist coming up. I wouldn't worry about that stuff until, you've mastered lighting, composition and value in, stuff that I'm doing right now that you're seeing in kind of studies like this. If you see, I'm not using any of those, any of the brushes. I'm mainly concerned, and you can see I'm not really looking into what does every tree look like here. I'm trying to hit the value cues, the lighting cues, and atmospheric cues. And I think that's really what's going to make you stand out from the crowd. There was a lot of people out there worried more about their texture brushes, but when you come in and you show a piece that has just solid lighting and solid, composition and design, that's going to stand out more than, what kind of textured brushes or, the guy used to create his painting. And once you nail that, and, I try to do this, once a day at least, take a different photo and paint from it, and you'll see how much better you get. And, at first it's going to be hard. You're like, oh man, it took me an hour, 2 hours to do this one painting, but it takes a while, and after a while you see you can knock it down to half an hour, 20 minutes, and you can really nail it in that time. And I think that's what's gonna make you a better digital painter.
Awesome. So the next question is a little bit more about, your choosing to come into this particular field. The viewer wants to know, basically, when you started off as an artist, how did you reach, as they put it, from zero to hero, in essence? Like, what particular things got you to where you are now in the professional sense?
Yeah. So I would have to, it's a lot of hard work. There's no easy way. I'm not a believer in, the guy is just super talented and that's the way he was born and that's why he's so good. I believe that anyone with the right passion and drive and motivation and persistence can get to the level they want. I followed a lot of great artists like, Dylan Cole when I was in school and Yannick Dussault, and I said, that's the quality of artwork that I want. Now, how do they get there? Again, I'm sure I can only speak from my experience, but I know, kind of the principles behind it is a lot of hard work. And, again, I mentioned stuff like this. Doing a sketch every single day from a photo can make you 100-fold better artist over time. Imagine, at first when I started doing this, it was tough. It was hard to get it down. And then after a year of doing this consistently, I saw how much better my artwork was. I would look at my older stuff that I had done in school, and I'm like, what was I thinking? This was awful. My value structure was off. The lighting is completely wonky. So you develop an eye for this slowly, through hard work. It's not, it's not overnight. Again, it's not, he's just super talented and that's the way he was born. It's a lot of, late nights. It's a lot of weekends staying home instead of going out and, partying with your friends. You stay home and, you do a painting a night or, a painting a week, doing color studies like this, and you really see the development, and it's really mind-blowing when you look back at the work that you did, even the first sketch that you did. You're like, holy crap, I came so far. And imagine doing that for, 4 or 5 years. Imagine the level of artist you're going to be. So I think it's really up to the artists and themselves and how much work and dedication they want to put into their craft. I think, taking a look at other awesome artists like, I look up to guys like Rob Rupel and, Dylan Cole and Yannick Dussault and look at their work and say, I want my work to be at this level. And every sketch or painting that I do, I compare it to them. I'm like, okay, does it still hold up to these guys? What's missing? What's the difference? And I'll be like, okay, well, the lighting is a lot better than mine. And I'll go and I'll practice lighting for, a month straight. And then the next painting I do, the lighting is going to be so much stronger. And then I'll look at something else and be like, man, their composition is so much stronger than mine. Well, how do I strengthen my composition? I'll go and I'll take a look at great films like Lawrence of Arabia, and Dr. Zhivago, some of the classics, Citizen Kane, and I'll freeze frame that frame, and I'll do a quick sketch of the composition. How did the director frame the shot, and I'll work on that for a month, and that will greatly improve. Another thing I like to do is study classical animation movies. Take a look at any of those are masterpieces of production design and composition. So I'll take a frame, I'll put the movie in, I'll freeze frame it, and I'll sketch from there, and work on composition for a while. So and doing that stuff along the way for a couple years, you'll see how much growth you really how much you grow as an artist. And I think that's the way to go about it.
Awesome. So this next question is concerned with what you would interpret as the difference between, or specifically, your thinking for realism versus more animation / cartoon. Because basically, the viewer says your colors are really awesome, and they want to know the difference between why you do saturated colors versus muted colors, and etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So earlier on in the slideshow, yeah, there were some color studies. I always loved animation. It's still a huge passion of mine. So I've always tried to keep that side up, and the saturation color part is really a stylistic approach. I mean, it's not about the saturation as much as it is nailing the value of it, and then more importantly the temperature. So is it cooler or warmer? The saturation you can bump up and down depending on the style that you're going for. If you want to really saturate a kind of sugary look, or a more desaturated, bordering on realistic. Some of the images that you saw were oversaturated, and that's just my addiction. I think to color, I just love it. So I think the more important question is the value correct, and is the temperature correct? So depending on if I'm painting a snow scene, it's gonna be more about value of the fill light and the key light and the bounce light than it is, oh, how saturated should I make the snow. It's hitting the value, and then the temperature will gauge how cool or warm it is depending on the lighting scenario, and then I can bump the saturation up as much as I want. If I want the snow to be really saturated, I'll pump it up. But because it was based on my value and temperature, it's going to be correct no matter what. Then it becomes a stylistic approach of how saturated I want to take it.
Okay, I think that answered the question. This next question is, how would you explain the difference between matte painting and digital painting in your own words?
Okay, so I think it's kind of a hybrid, actually. I mean, matte painting refers to mostly, generally, a photoreal painting. And you use the term painting loosely because it's really using, when you're in a photoreal kind of film industry, you're gonna have to use photos, and the painting aspect of that, in the painting and the matte painting, becomes from painting almost, hypothetically, painting the lighting into your shot. So taking an element, a photo element, and technically you're not really painting it, but you're kind of relighting it, and that's where the painting comes in. But with digital painting, it's stuff that you're seeing on the screen right now. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of hand painting in matte painting work for film, but to really push the realism, it has to be really based on photos. And digital painting, I would kind of say, is more concept work, kind of sketches that we're doing like this. And yeah, I think that's the difference. Matte painting really uses photos and relighting and matching value and color and atmosphere, whereas digital painting is more, using your brushes and doing more of a concept sketch. That's how it is to me. I don't know.
Okay, well, actually, another question that basically follows up on that particular explanation is, what is it about matte painting or hyperreal painting that appeals to you over more painterly concept painting?
Yes, I think, I love both sides, don't get me wrong, and both of them, have their appeals. For me, the hyperreal kind of matte painting stuff was the ability to take, a sketch to a really, really believable finished painting. And the hyperreal aspect is, pushing the limits. Some of the skies that you see aren't going to exist in reality, but being able to play with that and making it really fantasy and pushing the hyperreal aspect, for me, is really enjoyable, making something really fantasy oriented. And as far as digital painting, more kind of painterly stuff, that's also a real passion of mine, and I think it's something that I still work on today. Is how do you really show form and lighting in as few brushstrokes as possible. You always hear simplicity is the key, and doing the more painterly stuff, and you look at artists like Sargent, and even a digital artist like Jamie Jones, and you look at their work and you see, why is this so amazing? It's because they've mastered the simplicity of it. They'll throw one brushstroke down and to make a form read, and that's the brilliance of it. So it's always back and forth, because you can do stuff like that, and that's going to help you with your hyperreal matte paintings, because it's all based on value, form, color, and lighting. So whether you're doing painterly concept sketches or you're doing hyperreal, they're both based on kind of the fundamental core elements of image creation, of things like composition, value, color, mood, atmosphere, things like that. So I try to typically work in both. I enjoy both. Of course, the hyperreal stuff takes a little bit longer, because it's a lot of photo massaging and manipulation, whereas you're more free to go at it as much as you want in a more painterly concept sketch or something like that. But I enjoy both.
Okay, very cool. Now, this next question, I guess, is more technical in the sense of when working in digital, do you start in black and white or do you start in color usually?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. So you can see on your screen, I always flick back and forth between color and a DSAT version of it. Is because I'm trying to gauge the values. And value is it's probably one of the most important, I think, concepts when you're working digitally or even traditionally. To hone in your values is your underlying painting. So sometimes I will do a black and white painting just to nail my value structure down, because everything else is going to be based on that value structure. Color is added on top of my values. My values will always stay the same. What color and temperature of color I use will still be the same value. So as you can see I'm doing right now, I'm working in a black and white because I know the color is there as long as my value underneath it is correct. It's just pushing and pulling the temperature in the hue and saturation that will nail it and make it look exactly like that photo reference I'm looking at. So yeah, I will start, and I think it's very important to do at least a preliminary value study of your concept sketch, and just to nail your lighting and values before you jump into color.
Okay. Now that's a good point where you left off, because this next question actually is similar to the one you just answered, but also is technical in that the viewer asks, some artists draw a sphere on a separate Photoshop layer and render the lighting onto it to understand the effect of all the light sources in the scene. Do you have any tricks for understanding lighting in a scene to make it dynamic?
Are we talking more like Photoshop techniques, or more like being able to view the lighting or understand it?
Well, I'm going to make an assumption on behalf of John here. If you can write in, John, let me know what you meant specifically by that. I would suspect that he means more in the sense of Photoshop.
Oh, okay. Yeah, as you can see, well, if it's in that sense, then in my Photoshop layer stack in the demo right here, I like to keep everything separate because that's just how I like to work. I like to have control over everything separately. So I'll do like an outline, kind of a silhouette of that mountain, let's say, and then I'll clip the layers on top of that, as you can see, so it only paints, on that silhouette, and then I'll put in my key light pass, which is the more pinkish lighting on the mountain there, and then I'll put another pass on top of it, on separate layers, all of it, so in case I need to adjust stuff separately, I always have that control. Now you can obviously take this really far and have a million layers, so I kind of try to break it down into three essential. You have your silhouette base layer, your lighting, and then any other like fill light or bounce light on a separate layer, and then little details like maybe the rock textures on there on a separate layer, so I can go back and paint them in. But yeah, I generally like to work that way. A lot of people like to work on just one flat layer. I like to have the control of having it all separately in case, it also helps having that non-destructive workflow in production, because, you may have a painting that you've done, and then, the director or art director will take a look at it and be like, oh, the key light's a little too strong and the fill is a little too much. Can you just knock it all down? And instead of going back and you have to redo the painting, it's good to have, your key light on a separate layer, your fill light on a separate layer, so that you can go in there individually, knock them down, and be able to show them a revision quite quickly instead of going back and redoing it all. So yeah, I try to typically keep them separate. In this example, I use clipping masks a lot in general as well to make sure I stay, within the lines and keep it pretty clean and graphic.
Very cool. And actually, some of the points you brought up are very akin to what I do in my job as well, and especially in Photoshop, because working with textures and trying to apply them to different materials and making these appearances, there's lots of iterations you have to go through, and having those layers basically floating there in Photoshop so you can go back and edit it after the fact is a lot easier than going back to paint it from scratch. And that's
Absolutely.
a really good
Absolutely.
point. You know. So moving on to the next question here is a little bit more, I guess, industry specific. And it asks, where do you see the industry heading in the next few years? With a lot of the major studios closing, as we have seen in the last year, basically.
Yeah. So as far as map painting, I think the trend as a map painter is really driving towards 3D environments. 2D is still around, but directors nowadays really want to push the camera around and be able to, fly through a lot of the, movies that we've seen, like Iron Man 3 or Transformers movies. That Michael Bay loves to move that camera around, and there's so much action happening. So, and a lot of those backgrounds are all map painting, or what they call now digimat, which is, the map painter is now almost like a generalist. They're responsible for modeling, texturing, lighting, and projecting back on the geometry to have a full digital set. And you're seeing that a lot more these days. And just the fact that you can get very realistic lighting from 3D, and that's another advantage is that directors. I'm speaking more film now instead of game cinematics, but in film you really try to push photorealism, and that's gonna instead of the artist trying to use photos and painting on it, you do the lighting in 3D, and it's just very accurate, or at least serves as a very accurate base to paint on. So I think that's the trend now in map painting specifically, becoming more of a generalist, being able to model, texture, light, and render, and project back on the geometry with a full kind of a big camera move, kind of flyover type of deal. As far as the industry as a whole is concerned, yeah, it's been kind of rough for the film industry specifically. VFX in general has very slim margins as far as how much profit they're making, and the budgets. As you see a lot of the big budget shows that coming out, we see visual effects in every single movie that we see, but the amount of money the studios are actually taking home is still pretty slim. So, one prime example that's happened recently, Rhythm and Hues going under, was just mismanagement. As the director may change things a lot, and as a studio, you have to make those changes whether you're taking a loss or not because they gave you the project. So that's what ended up happening there, and they just couldn't afford, the overhead that caused, and ended up, bankrupting the studio. That's happening a lot. I think, in film, it's still pretty shaky, which kind of sucks because every single blockbuster that's out right now has visual effects in it. That's what people are going to pay money to see, but yet the industry is suffering, and I think people are becoming a little bit more aware of it. But I mean, we're hopefully, it will change. But again, the VFX industry is very intense right now. They're trying to they'll do a lot of, they'll try to squeeze as much work out of you as possible with the same salary. A lot of places still won't offer overtime, so it's kind of grueling that way. Some people like that kind of work style. You definitely learn a lot because you get so fast at what you do. So if you're into that, you do learn a lot. In the video game industry and the games industry, as we saw, stuff like Grand Theft Auto just made $1 billion in 3 days. The game industry is still very strong. You find a little bit more stability in games because they make so much money. But I work in cinematics, and I'm fortunate enough to be a part of Blizzard that has cinematics. A lot of studios, game studios, outsource their cinematics to companies like Blur or Digic, and those are also a great place to work. But it's just great that I get to work at Blizzard and on the campus, which is good. But yeah, that's generally what my 2 cents about the industry is.
Okay, very informative, actually. And I guess another question that came up as well is what would you recommend to someone living in a country where the industry is virtually non-existent? In terms of like the visual library and simulation that can translate into art, as well as job opportunities and clients looking for someone, what do you recommend for someone like that?
Yeah, it's definitely tough if the industry isn't around where you live. But I think we're kind of in a time like schools like CGMA. It wasn't around, or at least I wasn't aware of it when I was in school. And I think these types of programs and schools online are just a massive, massive help. I wish I knew about this if it was back then, but or had it back then, because you're getting a chance to learn from industry professionals, guys who have been through, and girls that have been through experiences that, coming out of school or that, and living in an area where you don't have the industry, you get a chance to see that and work with them. And I think that's a huge, huge bonus in, the digital age now that we have. There's so many resources online that you can pull from. And again, like when I mentioned in kind of the intro part, working in that internship that I had, I learned so much from those professionals. And it's the same thing, with programs like this that CGMA offers, is that you get a chance to work with those professionals and learn so much. And the fact that, they can paint over your stuff, and, you take it to the max, and then they show you how you can take it even higher, on ways that you didn't think about, I think is a huge bonus. So that part, as far as education, I think is a great advantage to anyone. But as far as, working or getting jobs when in a place where stuff like that isn't available, the only thing you can do is make the best portfolio possible. If you put together a stunning portfolio, there is no way that a studio, if you're in Europe or somewhere else, a studio like, let's say, in California is going to turn you down, because they're looking for talent. They're looking for top talent. And we have guys at Blizzard that are from all over the world, but because they have that portfolio and they demonstrate what they can offer and what they can do to the studio is willing to get them, visas, fly them out, pay them relocations, and, even have a apartment here ready for them for the first few months for them to get settled in. They're willing to take those steps to do that for an artist that they think is worthwhile. So I would say, if the industry isn't around in your area, focus on making your portfolio the best it can be. Take a look at the top artists out in the industry right now, and focus on bringing the quality of work in your portfolio up to that quality. And once you hit that, you're going to see a lot of people interested in your work, and your interviews start piling up, and then you get a lot more offers, whether it's freelance or, again, freelance is a huge thing. I mean, what they're doing is hiring talent. It doesn't matter where they are, as long as you're putting out good quality artwork. So in the digital age, it's not as much of a problem as it used to be. I think, again, the major thing is bringing that level of quality to your work that will make in the studios hunt you down and want to bring you over.
All right. Very, very, very informative. And now to get back to some more technical questions, actually, there's a few that popped up when you were just giving this last explanation that I want to get to as well, but trying to go in the order they're popping up. It says several of your portfolio pieces that you're showing demonstrate lighting the same scene in a variety of creative ways. Do you think this is something important to see in the portfolio and to demonstrate this ability?
Yeah, so I think it's very important. One, to be able to do it on the fly. Like if a director says, I like this one, but I want to explore different options just to make sure this is the right one. And you have to be able to take the exact same scene and relight it in different ways and show them a few different options. So having that knowledge and experience of doing it so many times, like an example like what's on your screen right now, this is, let's say, dusk or sunset, and taking the same scene like this and doing it in midday, noon. What will it look like? what is the key light going to be like, what the intensity of the key light, the fill light, atmospheric perspective. So, and that all comes from practice again. Do several studies of the exact same thing in different lighting conditions, and try to understand what happens to the value structure when it's in noon compared to when it's in dusk. And having that knowledge really is advantageous, not only to you as an artist because you're just more skilled than the other guy, but also on the job site, you can just knock it out if it does come up. You don't have to be sitting there and be like, oh shoot, like how does this look like? You can whip it up real quick and then in a lot of instances impress the director and be like, man, you really cranked that out real quick. And you'd be like, well, guess what? I did 100 of these studies before and this is nothing. So so I think it's very important to do stuff like that, not only just having an eye for it, developing an eye, but also for your own personal practice on understanding how value, color, and lighting changes in different lighting conditions.
Now, there's a question that basically is picking up on your technique right now on this particular image, and the viewer asks, well, it seems that you never pick the color out of the reference image. So do you do this for a better learning effect, or is there a different reason?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest crutches in the digital age, is that people are color picking too much, and you're not learning anything from color picking. So I try my hardest, and I try never to do it at all, is color pick. I'll struggle with a color if I have to for 10 minutes until I nail it, but I will never color pick, and I don't recommend any of you guys listening right now to color pick, because you're only cheating yourself. I think learning to kind of develop your eye to see color and value is important, and you're not going to learn that from color picking. And I've done a lot of these, so obviously I've trained my eye to know the value and the color and such, and you can see me turning on the hue and saturation to make it desaturated, because if you nail your value of what I'm seeing, you can just push around the temperature in your hue and saturation to get that color, saturation and temperature to get the exact color. So I would recommend doing that. And don't use the color picker, because you're only cheating yourself. If it takes you a long time just to nail a color, be patient with it and understand why did it take so long, or how did I end up getting the color. Well, then it usually comes down to, because one, I got the value correct, and then I pushed around my temperature and saturation, and that's as easy as it comes. So I would recommend doing that instead of picking your colors.
Okay. I have an opinion question here. In your opinion, is matte painting simply a natural evolution of digital painting, or is it more of a niche or specialization?
Yeah, I would think it's a specialization, actually, because it's funny, because I see a lot of awesome 2D artists, like just concept artists, and they do some phenomenal work, just with the digital painting. And then when they try to do a matte painting, it doesn't look as good as their concept paintings. And I think because it's just a different workflow that they're not used to. They're used to the loose, sketchy kind of painting, whereas matte painting, you have to really focus on those essential elements that I kind of talked about earlier on, that we cover in the classes. Is how do we look at this photo that we're seeing in front of our screen and pull out the essential elements, and then if we can find photo reference and matching it exactly to what we need in that color situation. So it's a little bit different, and it has a little bit to do with Photoshop techniques more, and that's again what we cover in the class. Is okay, we found the right reference, but now how do we bring it together with a whole slew of other reference photos to make this one cohesive painting? In a concept sketch, you can just paint on it, and it's just one big piece. You don't have to worry about extracting different elements for the sky, and then a foreground tree or a mountain, and then blending all these things together. So that's something we cover in the class, is how do we bring all all the different elements. How do we pull elements from photos and bring them in and make them into one cohesive image? And I think that's the main difference or specialization that matte painting is compared to concept sketch. I'm sorry, the demo's finished. So
no problem.
yeah, that's the main difference.
Okay. And how much time are you working on a matte painting? And they basically, the viewer says specifically, how much time are you working on a matte painting work masterpiece, as we've seen in these slideshows? So,
yeah, so it could range, from it depends. If I'm doing it at work, then I have my 8 hours a day that I spend, or maybe 8-9 hours a day that I spend on it, and typically it'll take a big finished piece will take maybe up to 2 weeks doing it every single day, depending on the complexity. Some of the paintings are just a lot more complex. You have a lot more characters. You have a lot more vehicles and buildings to integrate, and texture and light. So it may take longer. Some of the bigger shots, and depends on also if it was a still image or a camera move. The still images, I would say, I would put around 2 weeks, depending on complexity. And then the moving camera ones can take up to a month, because there's so much that go into the shot as far as the camera move and making everything look perfect. So yeah, I would say a still image with some good complexity would take about 2 weeks to complete, 2 or 3 weeks.
okay. This next question, I guess, is a hybrid question, but I'll try to ask it as it's presented. Do you have a different approach in your creative process as far as your thinking when you need to work on a matte painting that will be animated for film later, or is it just the same but with a different technical preparation process or steps?
Yeah, it's mostly a technical thing. If it's something I'm handing off to a compositor to composite the final shot, then I'm thinking about separating my layers out, and if it's going to be projected on geometry, and how many layers the compositor needs to composite elements into it, like smoke, haze, stuff like that. So it's a different approach on if I know this matte painting is going to be used for a final shot where the camera is moving. I'll try to keep my matte painting as clean as possible and as organized as possible on separate layers, and then make sure my alphas or mattes are clean, so that when I give it to the compositor to do it, he doesn't have to come back to me and say, oh, this alpha is not as good as it should be, and I'm getting artifacts, clean it up. So it's a little different process as opposed to a still image. If I'm doing just a 2D and projecting on a card, let's say, with a moving camera, then I don't have to worry about separating layers, and I can just paint, add a new layer on top of the stack, and just keep painting, and then another layer. So I'm not really worried about that. But generally, we have moving cameras, so you have to be really precise with the way you separate out your layers, and thinking about, is it going to be projected on geometry for a moving camera, and do I have enough coverage? Do I need to paint more or less, and things like that.
Okay. Now,
that answered it.
I think so. Now, this next question appeared to be a little bit more polarizing than the other ones, but I'm going to ask it anyway. It's not necessarily a bad question, but it's asking, if 3D is so vital, is there any need to learn 2D at all as it pertains to matte painting?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's the other thing is I see a lot of people I'm working with or have worked with. They have these insane 3D skills, insane. Like they can model a mech in, let's say, a day, and it looks phenomenal. But a lot of them lack, and you can tell, is that when they try to do specifically like an environment shot, they lack the lighting and the eye that, or even like the value structure that takes it to that nice, believable level. And that's when they usually send it to the matte painters. They're like, okay, he's taking it to as far as he can. You guys need to make this thing look great. And it's because we're traditionally trained, and you can't avoid that. I mean, if you want to become one of the best artists in the industry, you have to have strong 2D skills. That's just the way it is. I mean, you can become a good artist, using digital tools, but to be the guy who stands out from the crowd and understands lighting, value, atmosphere, and perspective, things like that, you have to have the 2D traditional skills. Whether not even traditional, but let's say digital chops. But it's all about the core elements of image creation. It's value, it's color, it's mood, it's lighting, and a solid foundation in those skills is going to make you 100 times better and stand out than the guy who can model an entire environment in a week, because at the end of it, his lighting may not be strong enough because he doesn't understand lighting as well as you do. He doesn't know the relationship between the fill light and the key light, and things like exposure, and value. So I think you can't run away from the 2D skills, and it's something I would highly recommend people invest, I would say, most of their time in, because 2D you can use in every single aspect of production, whether it's compositing, lighting, modeling, even with design, and understanding forms and how light will affect the forms on, let's say, a vehicle that I'm modeling. So that it has a lot to do with everything, and I would definitely highly recommend you keep up with the 2D skills even more so than digital.
Okay.
Or 3D.
Again, awesome response there. Now, this next question has two parts, but the second part actually has something in common with two other viewers' questions relating to the very same subject. So I'm going to ask you the first part first, and then I'm going to combine the last part with the other two questions for you. This is about the industry. So how important is it for an individual to have connections in the industry? The viewer states that they've heard that the industry is very competitive and studios only hire people through connections. That's the first part.
Okay, so it's kind of right and wrong. It's not so much connections as far as people have worked with you before and they trust you. They know the quality of work they're getting. So it's more networking than it is connections. If I have a buddy of mine in another studio and we've worked together, at Blizzard, and he says, and they're looking for someone, he's more likely, and I'm applying, he's more likely to trust me than someone that's coming, from somewhere else, because he's worked with me before and he knows the quality of work that I bring to the studio. And that kind of hints on another point that I want to make is, whenever you are, whether you're in school or you're working professionally, is to always remain professional and super nice, because your reputation is everything in this industry. If people think you're a jerk but your work is really amazing, people are not going to hire you because you're so hard to work with. They're more likely to go with someone who's a nice person, kind of easy to work with, and the work is good instead of the amazing work but the guy's a jerk. So always keep that in mind, and that's how you form relationships. And even in school, a lot of my friends were at different studios, and because we knew each other, we can kind of recommend each other, and we knew our work because we had a good, friendly relationship. So always, try to stay friendly and professional and easy to work with, because that will definitely help you down the road. But as far as connections, I think your work speaks for itself first, then then connections. I think if you have a stunning portfolio, that's going to speak louder than a guy trying to get his friend or someone he knows into the studio. Unfortunately, it does happen like that, because everyone's looking for experience. Like, I've worked with this guy before, so I trust him. So there is a bit of both, but the best you can do is have the strongest portfolio possible, and reach out to those people. Today we have things like LinkedIn, where you can add artists from every studio around the world, and just shoot them with an email. I mean, you'd be surprised how nice people are in this industry, that you can develop a relationship pretty easily, and you can send them their stuff and they'll look over it and they'll give you suggestions, and then you'll see your progress, And when the time comes where that studio is hiring, they'll be like, oh, I remember this guy who was emailing me. Let me reach out to him and see if he's available. So it's also a lot of that, too. You can make your own relationships as well.
Okay. Now, the second part of that question, and what you want to combine with three additional questions, relates more to how do you value your work, as far as, I'm assuming, in the freelance capacity in this one question, but specifically in another, like, will you cover in the class how to basically charge people for the work and what to expect as an entry-level rate, in essence?
Yeah, no, I don't go into the business side of the industry in this class. This is more of a art-oriented class, but I mean, it's a good point because it is very important to know your value and what your rate technically is when you're asked for freelance work. And it's just about asking, other freelancers and hoping that they answer. I mean, it is a kind of a personal question, like asking someone how much they charge and the rate is. But, some of them will answer you. And, again, it's up to, a lot of it's determined by your experience and the value that you value your time at. For you to spend 8 hours a day, how much is that worth to you, and how much are you going to be charging the client? But the business side is a totally different side, and it depends. It's a very personal thing, and yeah, sorry, I don't cover that in the class. But I think Bobby Chu had a book out about that. I'm not sure what it was called, but if you just Google it, maybe it'll come up. But yeah, I think a friend of mine read it. He said it was pretty good, so I would recommend checking that out.
Okay. And now, since we're basically approaching the last few minutes of this live session, the last few questions, I guess, are a little bit more, easier than some of the other subjects we covered. This next one basically is, how is your figure drawing, and does it add to your map painting as well as the other way around?
Yeah, so it's very important. In school, when I was at Sheridan, we would sometimes go twice a day, and it was free at the time, so it was helpful. But it's probably the most important skill set to have. You'd be like, well, I want to be a map painter. What does figure drawing have to do with anything? And again, it goes back to those 2D skills being the foundation for everything. Well, when studying the figure, not only do you become a great drawer, but your eye develops into how lighting affects form. How does the lighting on the figure show that lighting's hitting bone as opposed to fatty flesh, and how does that transition of light around a cylindrical shape of the thigh compared to having lighting hit a side face plane of the face, and having and understanding the subtleties of lighting and form that comes from figure drawing is probably one of the most important skill sets to have. And I still do figure drawing to this day, at least once a week. I try to go to figure drawing. I'm fortunate enough to have a program at Blizzard that offers it for free, but and I try to go as much as possible. And I think it's very important. You learn so much from there. Again, I go back to values. Having what's the intensity, the value of the key light compared to the bounce light that's bouncing up on the figure, and training your eye to see those subtleties that can apply to map painting, to concept painting, to portrait painting, to everything. So it's very important, and I would highly recommend all the artists out there to at least hit it up once a week. It's one of those skills that you carry on for life.
Did you learn Photoshop in art school, or are you self-taught?
Yeah, so I picked up Photoshop outside of art school. I was toying with it. I was really into graphic design for a little bit, so I was kind of toying with that. But I really started digital painting in art school, and really starting to figure out Photoshop in art school. But I was aware of it and using it before I got to art school.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to basically stop it here. I think it's a good stopping point. Again, I would like to thank everybody for attending today's live Q&A with Anthony. Anthony, we thank you so much for giving us a part of your Saturday and for letting us get an insight into what the class will be about and some of your background work and stuff. I really appreciate it, and I think everyone in attendance will, thank you as well for all the awesome work you showed us today.
Thank you so much for having me today, and thank you guys again for spending your Saturday with me. And I hope to see you in the class.
I do too. And with that being said, remember registration is still open for the next 2 weeks. So please get online and sign up for your classes soon before they sell out or before the classes close. Beyond that, again, we do have a session next weekend with Sam, basically, for those of you who are interested in signing up for that live Q&A. Look for the links to be sent out sometime either today or tomorrow, I suspect, if not Monday. But that being said, again, Anthony, thank you so much, and talk to you guys next week. Take care and enjoy your Saturdays.
Thank you. Take care, guys.